Important words for Unit 1 in math. An integer is always a whole number that can be either positive or negative. Integers cannot be fractions or decimals. So that's why it's important to remember integers are only whole numbers and not fractions or decimals. Positive integer is an integer with a value that is greater than 0. Pretty much every time you've been doing math for the better part of your life, you've been talking about positive numbers or positive integers. Just remember that a positive integer cannot have a fraction or a decimal attached with it. So if we represent positive integers on a number line, keep in mind that the numbers have to be bigger than 0, which means our number line would start and look something like this. My 0 mark would be here, and then my positive integers to the right. As I increase in value, my numbers are further away from 0. A negative integer is an integer that has a value less than 0. So if we take a number line similar to the one on the previous page and show the negative integers, we have our 0 mark here, and then could record our negative integers to the left of 0. Notice that as they increase in numerical value, they're getting further away from our 0. Opposites can be considered when we have two integers with the same numerical value but different signs. For example, positive 7 and negative 7 are opposites. We'll talk a lot about zero pairs when adding and subtracting integers in the next couple of weeks. A zero pair is when we have a positive 1 matched with a negative 1, which results in what we call a zero pair. So if you look at the lower left-hand corner, we're going to bring into view this idea of chips and the idea that we could make some zero pairs. So if I take and move a positive value and a negative value from my chip pile, these two chips are going to result in a zero pair, and they will actually cancel out or disappear because they won't have a value any longer. We know that if we add 0 to anything, we're left with that same number to start with. So I could continue to move my zero pairs away from the pile, again keeping in mind that as soon as I add them together, I actually end up with a resulting 0 or cancellation of those two numbers. We'll pretend that that's my 0. Absolute value is a definition you should remember from last year in 6th grade math. But since we're talking integers, we'll go ahead and review that absolute value is the distance a number is located from 0. Most often we're talking about the distance being measured on a number line. Hopefully you'll remember that absolute value is always positive. It's always positive because it's not possible to have a negative distance from something. We can only measure a positive distance. Continuing with this idea of absolute value, let's quickly review the symbol notation for absolute value. So if you're looking at a problem and it gives you questions such as this, that's actually asking you for what is the absolute value of 3. And on the previous screen, we mentioned that the absolute value is always a positive distance from 0, so the absolute value of 3 would simply be 3. Whereas the absolute value of -7 is located 1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, -7. It's located a distance of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 from 0. So the absolute value of -7 is +7. So now that you have these vocabulary words, hopefully they're written down or they've already been written down and you've used this video as a review, we're going to move forward in the next couple of weeks when we practice the operations with positive and negative integers, and we're going to be using the idea of a chip model along with representing our integer operations on number lines. And this will help us to come up with the rules for adding and subtracting integers.